G'day everyone. I was going to try and test a live, but apparently it's still not working, and I don't know why. I have been verified, I've done all the right things, and still not working. There's nothing on YouTube that tells me why I can't go live on YouTube, so I guess I have to wait for a little bit longer. I don't know. But anyway, that's all right. I thought I'd sort of have a bit of a chat a little bit about what I was talking about last night. So, Homestead. There was a couple of things I didn't mention. One of which I did sort of vaguely touch on, but yeah. The first one is, and there's piles of videos out there, is based on security. So even if you do set up a homestead, similar to what I was suggesting last night, and there was probably a pile of things I actually missed off the list, at some point you're going to have to secure it. Now, like I say, it depends really on the size of it, on the size of the land, but let's forget all that for the time being and look at purely location. So it depends on your version of where you want this to go, because clearly I was looking at, let's build it and let's never have to go back to a town again, or work or anything like that. So yeah, you won $1 million or $5 million or whatever it is. So if you're going to look at something, you're not looking at something that's within 5 minutes of a school or 5 minutes of your work, or, you know, the shop isn't that far away, etc., etc. So, and what you tend to find is that the blocks gradually become more cheaper the further you get out of town, because most people just can't be stuffed driving 2 hours to get somewhere. And look, if you were still working, I very much doubt whether you'd want to spend 4 hours on the road getting to work and coming home every day. So you're not going to be going back to work again, let's put it that way. You're going to have too much to do as it is. So basically, you're looking at a place away. Now, I can tell you this from personal experience, that once you actually leave a place and get 2 hours, 2.5 hours out of a city or large town, things become, you have to be a lot more organised, and it's the same here. I'm probably 130 to 160 kilometres away from a reasonable town that has all the amenities that most people are used to. So you have to, you know, I've just got to be a lot more organised in the way things I do, because I'm not driving 260, 300 kilometres to pick up a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. No, I'm doing various different places in the one go. So, you know, I might go to the shops first and see what's on special there that I can't get here. I might then go to a hardware store. I might then go to a camping store, or, you know, so there's normally about 3 or 4 different places I want to go, and I have things that I have on a list that I need to get. There's no point in going there for one of them, so you may as well wait until you've got all of that organised before you do it. So location is important. If you're still working, you're going to want to be sort of on the outskirts of the city, so you can still get to work and back. You can still drop the kids off, pick them up. You can still do all the day-to-day stuff, but you're pretty much, you know, you're not waking up with neighbours where you can touch the house over the fence. So, you know, location is the big thing. So the further you get out, the bigger the properties get, and it becomes you've seriously got to ask what your capabilities are as well. So are you young enough to be able to get all this stuff done? Are you fit enough? Because there's a lot of manual labour, and most of us, to be really honest, are used to sitting behind a computer screen for most of the day. We're not used to manual labour, so our bodies aren't adapt to it. Picking up timber, carting it, hammering nails, doing things that honestly you don't normally do. Getting a broad acre property, which is basically big enough to be able to put, I don't know, several hundred sheep, you almost turn it into a farm to a certain extent. It's no longer a homestead. But the machinery gets bigger because you're ploughing fields. You're needing seed bins. You're needing all this other machinery. So you've really got to be very selective about which block you actually choose and whether it's right for you. Is it too hilly? I mean, a hilly property is lovely because A, it's never going to flood, but by the same token, you've still got to mow the lawn. So pushing that lawnmower up and down hills is not as easy as what it looks. And then, just moving in, carting all that stuff uphill, downhill, uphill, downhill. And, if you forget your gloves or you forget your clippers or if you forget anything, you've got to understand that you're going to have to be going up and down hills. And everyone who looks at that and goes, oh, well, at least I get fitter. Ha. Well, that's great. But that takes time. I'm sorry, but I'm 54 and it was a lot easier to lose weight before I was 30 than what it has been since. So our bodies metabolize different once we reach a certain age. So, just bear in mind that, if you're 45, how are you going to be in 20 years' time when you're 65 and still having to climb hills and still having to do all the things that the property demands that you do? Are you still going to be able to do it? I don't know. So they're all things that you've got to sort of look at. You can't just be looking at it short term. You've got to look at it long term. And, you might plant stuff today that might, by the time you're laying down for your last snooze, they're not quite ready yet. But that's okay, because you've then got the next generation to come along within your homestead that will enjoy the fruits of your labour. So, you do have to consider long term when you go into homesteading. It's not a short term thing. You're not going to get short term results ever. It's going to be a long term result, and that's what you're looking for. So somewhere that you can grow old with, and understand that you're not going to move. So, or if you are close to town, is it something that's going to be able to grow with the kids? Something that they're going to want to be with, because all of a sudden, by the time they're getting to sort of 17, 18, 19, whatever it is in America when you can legally drink, they're going to want to go to pubs, and they're going to want to hang out with their friends. And if that town is 3 hours away, then they'll probably move. And most parents will probably say, well, thank God for that. But, this is homesteading. We're not looking for us. We're looking for what we can pass on to the kids. And this is one of the biggest issues with farms in Australia, and I'm sure it's the same with America, is that you've got third and fourth generation farms, but the kids don't want to be there. Mum and dad are busting their ass to basically keep the place going, and the kids have got absolutely zero interest in taking it over. And the parents suddenly look at themselves and go, why are we doing this? We may as well just sell up, buy a little place, because if the kids don't want it, what's the point? You know what I mean? So yeah, location is good. Don't just look for the pretty stuff. It's a bit like buying a new car or buying a house. We all go, oh, nice kitchen, nice bathroom. But then we realise the bedrooms are miles too small. So it might have the best kitchen you've seen all week, but it's not livable. The rest of it's no good. And it's the same with homesteading. A lot of us are used to domestic housing. We just go up, we turn the tap on, and water comes out. We don't know where it comes from, but it comes out. Same with your sewer. You sit on the toilet or you stand in front of it. Either way, where does that go? Well, in a city, it goes to a treatment plant. In the country, it goes to a tank. So, you've got to... They're things that most people don't come across, and then suddenly they're confronted with it, and it's like, oh, what do we do now? So, it is something to consider. Have you ever actually built a fence? It's not as easy as what it looks like. So, a lot of the farmers have been doing it for decades, and they don't even think about it. They just get out there and do it. But if you've never done it before, it's hard work. It is labour intensive, hard work. So if the fences, you've got to look at the fences along the property lines, all of them. If a tree falls down overnight, it's your responsibility to fix it, not the council's, not anybody else. It's yours. And it's not like you can just pick up the phone and ring a contractor. So you got to figure out how to do it. So, they're all things that when you're looking at homesteading, it is something that you need to consider. Then there's the animals. Animals who live there. They've spent hundreds of generations there. That's their home. That's always been their home. It was their home before you were born, and it'll be their home after you're long gone. So, if they see something they want to eat, they're gonna have a go at it. So, it is something to consider. Location, plus you need to do an awful lot of research into where you're going, what the natural issues are, the viability of the property to be turned into what you're after. Is it going to be worthwhile? Is it going to be worthwhile in the long run, in 20, 30 years' time, when you need hospital visits, doctor visits? And this is where we step into medical, because one thing I didn't pick up on or didn't discuss was medical. And it's something I've always struggled with, because the biggest issue with obviously doing all this manual labour, and especially if your bodies aren't used to it, is you're going to use certain things around the property that you haven't used before. And you can do all the safety training you want in the world, but you're going to hurt yourself at some point. And the problem is, if you're 3 hours away from medical help, you need to have something on site to fix it, or at least some form of communications to get in contact with someone who can. Or if the whole system has gone down, what do you do then? There's a lot of literature. Yes, you can do first aid courses, but you need to do probably the advanced ones. But then it's like anything else. Unless you're using it every day, you forget after a while. It's practice makes perfect, as they've always said. So medical is something it's something that has always got me. And it'd be easy to say, oh, fine, we'll just get a nurse or something like that into the group. Well, what happens if you don't know a nurse? What happens if none of your family members are a nurse? Does your group need a nurse? And then what sort of nurse? Because obviously you've got ENs, which are enrolled nurses. You've got RNs, which are registered nurses. But then there's different fields within those sort of practices as well. You can be a registered nurse, but it doesn't mean that you know how to fix a broken leg. Your speciality might be childbirth. And I don't know too many babies that run around breaking their legs. So it becomes it's this whole, once you open this can, you follow the rabbit hole, and it just goes on and on and on forever. So, you could set up and my thought was to set up a caravan or something along those sort of lines that you could turn into like a hospital to a certain extent, where all your medical gear was kept, where you could actually keep a bed, that you can sort of get someone to lie on and people can work on you around you, where you've got decent lighting and all, and it can be kept sterile and that sort of thing. But look, I don't know. I'm certainly no good at this sort of stuff. So, but it is something to consider, and that sort of takes you into a whole range of other things. So, what specialities do people need to be when they're working on a homestead? You ask a farmer, and they do everything. They're absolutely everything. They're plumbers, they're mechanics, they're electricians, they're fixer-uppers. You ask them to do anything and they'll do it in about 5 seconds flat, and you'll just be sitting there and going, how the hell did you know that? Well, it's because they've had to do it, because they're miles away from anyone, and the cost to get someone out to actually do it while they're sitting around waiting for it, they may as well just get in there and figure it out themselves. So, you start getting involved in, well, okay, you need a mechanic, but then it's not just a mechanic for a car, is it? It's a mechanic for a tractor. It's a mechanic for the freezer rooms. It's a mechanic for the diesel generator. It's a mechanic for, they've got to know everything. And it's the same with the electrician. It's not just, oh shit, my light switch doesn't work. Why isn't that working? It's also, can they do the solar? Can they get the lighting systems? Can they do a whole range of other things? Because electricity is something you don't stuff around with. You've got to know what you're doing. Plumbing is another one. And it's not just the plumbing in the houses, in the sheds, it's also the plumbing in the sheep trough. It's the plumbing in the, plumbing just keeps on. It's in the fire systems. It's in everything. So, and the list honestly goes on and on and on. Are you a gardener? Well, everyone's a gardener, but are you a gardener? Do you have the experience to know what to do with seeds? Because anyone can go to a garden shop this weekend, buy a packet of seeds, throw it in a container with some garden potting mix and grow something. I mean, it's not hard. You just got to make sure it's watered. You've got to make sure it's getting sun, etc., etc., and eventually it grows, and then you replant it into a bigger pot, etc., etc. But then, okay, so the fruit grows. So you pick the fruit. So then do you know how to actually take the seeds out of that fruit, preserve them so that you can replant them? Not a lot of people do. Heirloom seeds is what I was trying to think of last night. What else is there? There's, so gardening's pretty easy. Cooking. Sure, you can cook for your husband or your wife and a couple of kids. I mean, if you can't cook by now, then you need to learn. But it's an entirely different story if you're cooking for a community. So, all of a sudden you got 16 people you've got to feed. So, you've got to figure out how much food you've got, what you're feeding them tonight. Is it different from the last night, or is it the same? Can you make things for not just 4 people, but multiple people? And you need to be able to sort of manage that resource as well. So, you almost need a chef, whether they come from a hotel or a pub or a restaurant or something like that. But that's the sort of mentality. You take home cooking to the next level. So, it's, can you peel an onion? Well, that's fine. Yeah, sure, I can peel an onion. Can you peel 16 of them? And then 16 potatoes, and then 16 carrots, etc., etc., etc. So time management becomes something that goes above and beyond what a domestic cook normally does. They'll just throw something together and people will eat it. And if they don't, well, they'll get takeaway. And if you can't do that, they've got to eat what you serve. Simple as that. So, and can you do a variety? That's the other thing. So, you've got, and being a chef, can you do butchering? I don't know. Can you? Being a chef is not just going to a supermarket and picking out a lump of meat. No, when you're off grid, that doesn't work. You've got to be able to kill a sheep. You've got to be able to butcher it. I know how to butcher it. I don't have a butcher's saw, but I do know how to butcher a sheep because I've done it before. I've butchered rabbits and I've done those before. So most animals are pretty much the same. It's just the size really that changes. But and we're all pretty much made of the same stuff, so it's not hard. So it is something to consider. The whole homesteading on a reasonable, even if you're looking at the very minimums, you need to be looking at probably around about 16 people as a minimum, and that's hoping that everyone's got different skills, like a different skill set. You can probably do it, you can probably get through a lot of things, but bear in mind, we're living in pretty bloody good times at the moment. So, if you do something to yourself, well, you nick off to the doctor. But what happens when that doctor's not there? These days we just walk into a supermarket. We do, okay, grocery shopping's expensive. We all know that, and we know why. But at the end of the day, you can still go up and grab a few packets of meat, your vegetables, your tinned goods, etc., etc. Okay, you're going to spend $300 or $400 on it, but that'll feed 4 people for a week. You'd like to think it would feed them for longer, but apparently not these days. But I'm not getting into that. But you're not going to have that. So if you've got a few sheep running around, well, then you need to get into animal husbandry, which then bring in vets. So, what happens if the sheep don't look all right? They're not really eating what they normally eat. Why? Why are the chickens dying all of a sudden? What have we done wrong? These days we just jump on the internet, talk to AI or Google it, and hey presto, there's the answer. Well, there's 10 answers and you just got to figure out which one it is. But at the end of the day, if you don't have those resources, what are you going to do? You can't learn now, because unless you're getting chickens now or sheep now, you need certain periods of time to be able to sort of figure out what's going wrong with them at some point. But a vet knows. A vet just has to look at the damn things and he goes, yep, that's what's wrong with it, or her. Not trying to be sexist. This is what happens in my head, when you start sort of thinking about, okay, this is what I want to do. It's not just about winning the lottery. It's about people as well. And sometimes you need to get that group of people together to be able to make it a successful sort of venture. But then you get all the relationships and all that sort of thing that happen in between time as well. So it's sort of jumping off the back of a video that I saw today, but it's about finding your tribe. And we use that sort of term a lot these days, but it sort of takes another step onwards once you start looking at homesteading. And whether you set up a small homestead or a big one, depending on whether it's close to the city or away from the city, all these things are going to come into your thoughts at some point down the track. And you're better off thinking about them now before you take that leap, because they are things you need to really consider. Which then gets into security, obviously, because once you've got a setup where you've got reasonable healthcare, It's never going to be perfect, okay? We're not buying MRI machines. We're not getting blood testers. We're not getting all this expensive medical machinery. We don't have access to that. So, I'm sure there's some people who are mega billionaires who do have this stuff, but, we've got to deal with what we've got to deal with. You need people with experience. You need people who are very good at what they do, who are willing to jump into the situation that you're in, that you actually get along with, and that takes time. It's not, hey, I need a nurse in an ad, and then they turn up. And they're wonderful people to start with, but, and they're going, oh, I'd love to be on a homestead. I'd love to never have to work again, blah, blah, blah. 3 months later, you hate their guts. And they hate yours, and you just don't get along. So, relationships, once you get to a certain age, are harder to actually build, because we've all had the trust issues. We've all had the personality clashes. We've all had that. That's just life. So, it's going to happen, and it's like any relationship you get into to start with. It's all fun and games at the start, up until it's not, and then it goes downhill fast, and then they pinch all your money. But I'm not getting into that today. So yeah, it's about finding your tribe, but it's also sort of finding those relationships that are going to stick, where the personalities are actually good. And I don't know how you test any of that, because you do need those people. Plus, you need to be able to move them around, like I said last night. You need to, the cook can't just be a cook all the time, because it's going to get boring as. The mechanic, as much as they'll have plenty to do, and they always seem to find stuff to do, it is good to have backups. And so, even rotating, or, getting people in there to learn stuff, just in case, so it becomes a community. You eat together, you drink together, you do a lot of things together, but there's also that time away where, you need that time apart also, because, it just allows you to go off into the bush and scream your bloody head off, because, the world is rubbish and this person's giving you the shits, and then you come back and you're all good again, hopefully. So security, once you've got that group of people, once you've got that food resource, once you've got the medical care, once you've got the machinery, you've got the wonderful place to live, you're growing food, the sheep are happy, everyone's happy. And then that little tribe from Adelaide who spent 3 weeks trying to get out of the city because everyone keeps on trying to them, rocks up on your doorstep. And you don't want them there, because you've already got enough mouths to feed. You've already got everything else. But, they're crying because such and such has got a broken leg. And what are you going to do? And are you going to bring them in, get them fixed up, and then move them on? Or, or are they lovely people and they end up staying? What's your decision? You've got to have these sort of scenarios played out in your mind before you actually reach that point. Are you going to let them in? Are you not going to let them in? Or what are you going to do? And then you go from that extreme to the nth degree, where you've got Jim Bob and his mates in their V8 Land Cruisers or V8 Utes or Fords or trucks or whatever you want to call them, who come rolling down the road with all guns blazing, wanting to take over everything that they can see. Are you ready for that? Do you have plans in place? And the other thing that I missed was, because I happen to live in a bushfire area, that is, scrub blocks are generally fire, as I said last night. So you've got to actually have somewhere to go. So although you've got the fire sprinklers going off in every direction and it's flooding the place and it's keeping the fire away, you still need to get somewhere where you're going to be relatively safe until that fire front passes. So there are bunkers you can get that actually go underground. They're fire bunkers only, so they're not something that we all wish we had. The old nuclear silos with the swimming pools and the cinemas and God knows what else. These are actually bunkers that you actually go to, and you can actually really only stay in them for around about an hour, and that's it. You've got to be getting out of it after that, and that should be more than enough time for the fire front to have passed. So there you can get different sizes, and they're available from Victoria. I have looked them up before. They're quite, well, they're not cheap. They're probably around about 20 odd thousand for a 6 person and more for a bigger one. So you probably you'd be looking at about 60 grand, I suppose, and that's not including 6 person is 6 adults. So and then of course you've got the dogs and the cats and the whatever else you want to save. The sheep, unfortunately, will have to look after themselves. So it is something that you need to look at as well. So if you've got 16 people, you're probably looking at around about 60,000, I suppose. So six threes, 18 people. So if you've got 16, 3 of them are going to have to do. And somebody actually mentioned this a few years ago, that it's not a silly idea to actually have. They're not water pistols. They almost remind me of the Nerf guns, but they used to basically look like a plastic toy Nerf gun, except instead of shooting those Nerf things, they actually had a water canister underneath it, and they could shoot water out of it. Have a few of those around. Why? Not to actually shoot each other with water. They're actually you can actually use them to put out spot fires. So they are actually handy to have a few of them sitting around, as long as no one mucks around with the things too often. And get something with a reasonable size water canister underneath. So that if you do get a fire go through, and obviously the sprinklers have done their job, but the problem is that with most fires these days is that they blow in a lot of embers first. So you've got a lot of leaf litter, you've got a lot of grass, stuff like that that's flying around in the air, because fires actually provide their own weather system. So it could be 30 degrees outside, just a slight breeze, but inside the fire it's around about 70 degrees Celsius, and it's about 120 kilometre an hour winds. It's very different weather system within a fire. Fire creates its own weather system. So, and more often than not, it's actually the embers that will actually start the most fires rather than the actual fire itself. So if you've got a fire that's coming and it's blowing a lot of embers around, you get these water pistol things, fill them up with water, and then run around and put these embers out, put these things out. And because they actually shoot water a fair distance, you don't have to be standing on top of these things. So you can, if they're landing on the roof, then you can actually fire water up onto the roof without turning the entire sprinkler system on, because you really only want that sprinkler system to be working probably about 2 minutes before the fire actually gets to you. So it's going to be stinking hot, in fact boiling hot, and that's when it comes down to what sort of clothing are you wearing as well. But firefighters will tell you that, and that's probably somebody else you want living on your homestead, someone who's got experience in emergency situations, who's actually volunteered, been involved with, who knows what's going on, how to do things right, because most of us will panic, and just grab a hose and start doing stuff that is not of any help at all and won't actually do anything. So, you know, if you've got somebody who's actually been there, done that in your team, that can be a massive help. You know, so their mind is just switches onto work mode to a certain extent, and it's the same with everyone else. And then you can run drills of various things. You know, you can run drills of the solar system not working. The battery, you know, the diesel generator kicks in instead. You know, you can run drills of, oh my God, there's a fire coming. You know, hit the alarm system, and you might have an alarm system so that it warns everyone. And this is part of your security as well. So they're not just looking for people who may have bad intentions about what they're going to do on your property, but they also are good lookouts for things that, you know, running around the camps, running around the homestead, that you don't actually pay a lot of attention. You've got 30 other things going on in your head. So, and they could send a warning and say, there's a fire, guys, coming. Everyone drops everything, gets into the evacuation zones, figures out we already know what our jobs are because we've already done the drills, and we just get on with it, and we do what we have to do. You know, so running drills, I mean, the Army, the Air Force, all these armed forces do it all the time. And they don't just do it at, you know, a lovely 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, they do it 1 o'clock in the morning when everyone's asleep, you know, because you don't know. You know, a bit of lightning might hit the scrub, start a fire at 10 o'clock at night. By 11 o'clock at night, it's 500 metres away from your doorstep. So by the time your smoke alarm goes off, it's too damn late. So having these spotters running 24/7 in shifts is also something you need to consider. And they're not just looking for the bad guys, but they're also looking for natural events that could create havoc inside your environment as well. You know, and it's just another pair of eyes. That's really all it has to be. So, yeah, security is something that, like I say, there's hundreds of videos out there based on rural properties. So, you know, and there's a lot of really good ideas. You know, not even from the main driveway point of view, to electrified fences, to, you know, gravel stuff you put underneath the gravel driveway that warns when something goes across. But bearing in mind, you're in the country, so, you know, you might have deer or you might have a bear. I mean, I'm talking America here. You might have a, you know, any sort of animal that walks across that happens to sort of set off alarms. So you've got to be sort of careful about which ones you use, and the environment that you're actually in as well. And we've got the same issues in Australia. You know, a fox could walk across, kangaroo could hop across, an emu could walk across. You know, there's plenty of animals out there, no matter which country you're in. So you're always going to have certain sort of issues that are related to your environment. So, you know, again, it's one of those things that we all come from a city. We're all basically desk jockeys half the time. So, you know, we don't really see a lot of this sort of stuff. So, and it's not really until you get out there that you do see it and you do come across it. So, but it's good to be aware. And again, it comes out to this homework idea. I mean, a lot of us thought we'd gotten over it when we left school, but apparently not. So, like I said, it's not just about winning $5 million and getting out there and doing it. It's, number one, a lot of hard work. Number two, a lot of planning. Like, a lot of. Number three, a lot of questions that need to be answered. If you can only fill up an A4 page with the questions you've got, you're doing it wrong. There's a lot more questions than that, and questions more often than not branch into other questions. So, and you've got to have a lot of these things answered before you get out there. And there is more than likely questions that you haven't asked, I haven't addressed, that are going to come up. And it's just going to be that way. So it's not as simple as getting out there, having a few cows, having a few sheep, and living a life of luxury. No. No, that's not the case at all. So, yeah. But I might leave it there. I'm sure there's a lot more to discuss on this topic. But it's, yes, you can do it a lot cheaper. Yes, you can do it with less people. The question is, we've all got our own budgets. I certainly haven't won the lottery. That's why I'm in a tent half the time. So, yeah, we've all got restrictions, health restrictions, that we don't talk about publicly, and that's fine. We've got, fitness levels. We've got all these things that must be taken into consideration. Do you get blood tests for everyone? I don't even know what my blood type is. I've been asked that a few times, and I've got no idea. But you're probably going to want to know if you're getting into one of these communities. And again, it's this medical thing. It just goes on and on and on. Before you get out there with everyone, do you send them all for full bloods and full testing so that you've actually got a record of it that the nurse can then sort of keep, so if such and such starts losing blood, where the hell are you going to get blood from? You're going to need to know whose blood's compatible with who, because you can't just donate blood and then shove it in someone, because that could actually be worse. That could make things a whole lot worse. So, in fact, it could do that to somebody. So, and this is, again, this whole knowledge thing and this whole rabbit hole. Homesteading is hard, man. It's really hard. And that's before you've even started the journey. So, but, there is a lot of information out there. And it's just a matter of asking yourself, always asking questions. Just never, ever, ever stop asking questions. You may feel like an absolute git doing it, but there's half a dozen other gits who wish they'd asked that question as well. So you're not the only one. And you're not the only one asking the same question. I've been drawing houses for the better part of 30 plus years now, and I can tell you right now, the amount of houses I've walked into, and everyone asks the same questions. And every now and again, somebody will ask something a bit off the shelf, but funnily enough, you've been asked that as well. So, it's a matter of asking the questions and eventually getting it into your head as to how this all actually goes together. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Hope this has been informative, and I will catch you all later. Bye.